Hello, and welcome to my best and worst ratings review episode. This is the first time I'm trying one of these. It's a review of my own review. And at the start of March of the Machine, I previewed all of the cards for Limited, and I want to go over sort of my previews and how I did, basically. So, looking at the card I got most right and most wrong for each color, and then one for the multicolored as well, just to kind of like have a little bit of retrospective, try to get better at this. It's not something that I'm ever going to be perfect at, but there's certainly areas I can improve in terms of my card evaluation skills. So, things to know about what I mean when I sort of talk about tiers. You're going to see tiers come up today. My reviews are done with 5 tiers. Tier 1 is the best, and Tier 5 cards are the worst. And so, in terms of determining when I did really poorly, basically it's like, well, which of these had like the greatest difference between my perceived tier rating of it now compared to when the format started. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So, my worst white card in terms of evaluation, in my opinion, was Core Halberd. So I originally rated this card as a tier 2 card. Basically, I thought this card would be an actually actively good card in your deck. I think that was probably a bit of a miss just from the outset because it's I have a weakness in that I want equipment to be good. Um, just because I like the card type. Like I think the card type has allows you to do a lot of cool stuff, and it's like I enjoy playing with it. So I like when they have good equipment. Wizards obviously does not like good equipment because they would print it if they liked it. They basically are kind of very against it because I don't know, because they got Skull Clamp and Umezawa's Jite so wrong, and they were like, well, we're not gonna print those again, and so they just never have wanted to do that. So yeah, with this card specifically, I think I just kind of missed insert. Like this is like part of the reason this was so bad is that White didn't really want to be doing this at all. It didn't really synergize with anything White was doing. There is this red white equipment deck that you will play this in with Rayev, but other than that, the card basically doesn't really fit anywhere. It's just kind of its own weird like 1 mana low impact. Like I'm a short sword enjoyer. I like short sword as a card, which is why I liked this card so much. I was like, I like short sword, and I do like short sword more than most. But yeah, this format was just too high power level for this card. This card just really didn't. It just wasn't enough. It just wasn't doing enough to overcome uh, the ability. So originally I had this rated as tier 2 card, which is an above average card, which I think obviously it should never really have been a tier 2 card. It really should have been tier 3. And that's just a note. Just like basically we should have a rule going forward that any equipment can't go higher than tier 3, like unless it's like they reprint Shadow Spear, and then we can put it in tier 1. Um, yeah, and the reality is this was a tier 4 card. The reason you could argue it's a tier 5 completely unplayable, but I think it actually does have some utility and isn't like an absolute like nightmare to have in your deck. So I think I would actually leave it in tier 4. Um, yeah, and so the card I got the most right, I would say, is Aerial Boost. Aerial Boost, the free quote unquote um, spell in white, the free combat trick. I got this one really right. So I the thing that I understood about Aerial Boost is that it was free, right? Now, where this got me into trouble is there was another free, the red combat trick, that did not end up being good, that I also thought would be decent. Now, I didn't think it was going to be as good as Aerial Boost, but I did think it was going to be good. And that one I ended up getting wrong. But the Aerial Boost I got right, and this card ended up being good for a number of reasons. One of the reasons that it was good was not that you could use it to flip battles, because that was basically never worth doing. Um, but the reason that the flexibility really ended up being what carried the day, and that, you'll see that sort of as a theme with a lot of these cards, is that flexibility ends up just really mattering a lot. Um, And I think that's something that I think a lot of people miss, and myself included, I miss on a lot of cards. And I think I need to start thinking more about, hey, this card kind of does like a lot of small things. Like this fits into a lot of places that a lot of cards don't. Like this card really has a lot of roles. It is a normal combat trick, but it can also just be like a lethal generating spell. Like it can also just be like, hey, you're dead. Like you're at like 5 life and now you're just dead because you didn't have a flyer on the battlefield. I top deck this and I actually like have an out to winning the game, which I think a lot of cards like aren't gonna like that's just not something that you have access to all the time. And this ended up being White's best common, and I had it in tier 2. I think a lot of people had this lower. Like a lot of people had this at tier 1. Now again, like my tiers do not necessarily line up 1-to-1 with the limited resources like A through an F scale, because they're not quite the same thing. They're not designed to be the same thing. Like tier 2 cards are sort of like cards you're happy like actively like looking for, and I think this is one of those cards at the end of the format. All right, in blue, my worst preview, Invasion of Kamigawa. So I don't really I think I got caught up with this card in that there was this narrative that developed in my head that turn 4 is when you want to play battles, and I think this is the narrative that developed in Wizards of the Coast's head as well when they designed a bunch of these, is because they made a lot of the battles 4 mana. Like they were like, all right, a lot of the battles that like are gonna be like are the previewed to be good battles are going to be 4 mana. And so like all the battles that are 4 mana are inherently better because that's when you want to be playing battles. It turns out that just kind of isn't a fundamental truth. Like cards have to just be independently strong. You can't just be like, well, because this costs 4 mana, and that's when you want to be playing battles optimally, which it turned out was not even true. Like, you didn't actually want to be playing battles on turn 4 anyway. But even if you had this card, I still don't think would have been good. I would give this word just, like, the thing is if this were just the front side of the, like, if this all were just one card on the front side, it would probably be, like, a B- or something, or like a tier 2 card. Like it, and that's kind of what I saw this as, like in general. I don't even know if it would be that high. Like it might actually be like a tier 3 card if it was just the front side of the card, because it's like a 4 mana 2/3 tap something down, put a stun counter on it, and then you get this like thing that deals damage to players and draws cards, which is an ability that always is overrated. So I just kind of just forgot that all of these elements are bad, and you just don't want a bunch of these like. All of the things about this card that like could make it good are traps every single time, and I don't know. Like it's not even like It's not even like I played this card ever. I never played this card. Like I rated it a tier 2, and was just like whatever, and then just never actually played it. So I don't know. I was a bit of a privilege with this one. And my best rating in blue was Cyber Cryptomancer. I'm not going to read what the cards do. I don't know why I'm saying what the cards do. As mentioned previously, it's important to talk about versatility, and this is a card that again I rated correctly, but I didn't rate it correctly for the right reasons. I saw this card and was like, hey, this is a really good like trick, and it'll protect your guys, and like backup is just nuts, right? I was like, backup's insane. And that ended up kind of being false, though I don't 100% know whether that was because of like that was because like the cards were bad or because the mechanic was bad. It's always difficult to kind of tell. But yeah, so this card was very versatile. This card did do a lot of small things, and I think that was really what carried it and made it a strong card, a still underrated card to this day. In my opinion, by the majority of players. This did end up being a great card, a card that you were actively happy to play in your blue decks. It did have the added benefit of protecting all the very, very powerful cards in the format, which ended up mattering quite a bit. Yeah, so next, my worst black rating. So this is Breach the Multiverse. So I kind of got destroyed on this, like my by myself mostly, because like nobody else cares about these ratings yet. Someday, but for now, it's just me is the one who's getting the destruction happening. So I rated Breach the Multiverse as an unplayable card, and the reason I did that is simple, and it's that I basically just was like, these cards are always bad. Like reanimate effects are bad and limited. I sort of used a little bit of a heuristic, and you'll see this. There's another. Well, I didn't actually put it on here, but I had Invasion of Tovada too low too, which is the black white reanimate spell, or the reanimate battle. I had that too low as well, and the reason is that reanimates are generally bad and limited. Like they're just like 5 mana reanimate a creature is bad. Like it's not a good card. Um, and the reason that I have to sort of like always start there is because it's a card that I want to be good. You know what I mean? It's one of those cards that I'm like, I want it to be good, and therefore I have to always rate it as bad because I know that it's usually not that good, but I want it to be good, so I sort of artificially lower it in my mind. Um, Really, what I missed about this card was how much the mill 10 matters, and like how much value you're getting. And part of it as well is that you're coming off of All Be One, where 7 drops aren't like a thing you can cast, and this is why I had Atali low too. Now Atali wasn't like nearly as egregious. I think I had Atali in like tier 2 instead of tier 1, which like is wrong, but is not like you could see how I could think that coming off of All Be One, where if you had a 7 drop in your deck, you just lost the game. Um, Unless it was a Traxa. Yeah, I just the mill 10 really was the key to this card. It actually provided an alternate win con as well that I think I missed. Like there's just a lot of ways this card wins the game for you, but I didn't take into account. Best rating in black, Ichorshade. I have really come to understand um, what works and what doesn't in black. I guess like this type of card is always a type of card that is appealing to a lot of people. However, it is never good. And so like and there's also the card like Completed Huntmaster that's a sack outlet in black that I rated lower than a lot of people, and it ended up being kind of bad. Like it ended up not being that good. A lot of people would say that it underperformed. I would say that it performed how I expected it to. It's just there are these archetypical cards in black that are always sort of the same idea. That like I need this one thing to happen and it's great. Or like this card, right? Like if this card said creature left the battlefield, um, it would be much better. First of all, second of all, I think it would be like actually still like I still don't even know if it would be good, right? Because it's cards that require something else to happen in the game to even be like an acceptable Magic card are bad generally, right? So like this card is completely unacceptable as a 3 mana 2/3, and that's how it plays most of the time. It's also really bad against Bounce, which there is as far as Dispersal in the set, which just completely destroys this card. Um, but even without that card, like I just don't think there's any real like there's no like the upside is what like you get this like okay I play a 3 mana I play this on 3, our 2 drops have traded, I get a 3 mana 3/4. A 3 mana 3/4 is not even like that good. It's fine. It's like a tier 3 card. It's like that's a tier 3 card right there. So that's the problem, right? Like when you play this card, you're hope that's what you're hoping to happen. And that's like you're getting like the best case scenarios. You're getting a three, like a tier 3 card, and you're just like, okay, great. Like my card was acceptable, and so that's why these cards tend to be very bad. I have caught on to them, and I'm very happy with myself for understanding that. Red, my worst rating, Karsus Depth Guard. I had this at tier 2. Now, the reason is that there's a lot of stats here. And it doesn't, like, it in theory didn't take much for this to just be a 3 mana, like, 4/3. But it turns out, like, there just wasn't a critical mass of cards for this. I'm sure there was a deck that was actually genuinely good at using this. Another thing to note about this card is that all of the 4 mana backup cards were bad. Like literally every single one of them except for Bola Slinger. And Bola Slinger was like fine, but Red White was terrible. The red cap heal slasher was very bad. The green, I love as much as I love Chomping Kavu, and it's fine, it's not good. I talked about Bola Slinger was pretty good. There wasn't one in any of the other colors, I don't think, that was 4 mana specifically. Or again, the 4 mana specifically is not necessarily the right criteria. But again, backup was just weaker in general than it looked. So you didn't necessarily want to be playing all these backup cards. And as a result of not necessarily wanting to play all the backup cards, and there not being a really, really critical mass of them, this just didn't, there just weren't enough things to activate this. Like, this wasn't the free automatic thing that I thought it might be. And this is kind of a dangerous card to print, right? Like, this is a card that I got wrong, but I very easily could have gotten right if there were that critical mass. I think this is more of a lesson in trying to figure out how much is enough, right? Like, how much of this type of thing do you need to have in a set for this card to be good? And the answer is more than we had in this set. In this set, there was a decent amount, but there really wasn't. Like, when you were playing games, you were like, once I played the games, I was like, oh, this card, in addition to being red, like where you're just never going to play red, because red, just, it just doesn't, there's just not enough. It didn't really come through until I played the games where I was like, oh, there just isn't anywhere close to enough of a critical mass for this to just be on every game. And so that's where I got got. Next, Invasion of Mercadia. So my best red, this is my best red preview. I think myself, and the limited community are really getting good at understanding how good these cards are. They do still go later than I think they probably should in drafts, just generally. But, again, with the versatility, this is another versatile card, kind of. It does do a lot of things. You get a lot of value for this card for your mana. So, yeah. Like, this card just does an enormous amount. Basically, any type of like Thrill of Possibility card that also does anything at all really is a good card. You should never put Thrill of Possibility in your deck. There are some people who will tell you that it's acceptable at any point, and those people are not right about it. But these type of cards, like this card, Bitter Reunion is another example of a card where it's like, hey, like it works. Like this card also is really good. And then we've just seen this effect be good. We've just seen the effect be really strong, and this is another continuation of that. And I'm glad that I was able to be like, hey, we've seen this as a pattern. I'm gonna rate this card very highly. It delivered. It was a good card. It was a great card. Yeah. So in green, my worst rating, Wary Thespian. And again, so when I did these ratings, like when I did like worst and best, I tried to focus more on the lower rarity cards, just because the higher rarity stuff doesn't like matter so much. I I just don't. I just was really more concerned about trying to be like, hey, these were the because commons are the ones that matter. Like misevaluating commons or how you misevaluate a format. Um, so yeah, where Thespian I missed, right? So this card uh, ended up really impressing me. I can't spell, but um, this ended up being my favorite of the green commons. I it kind of isn't the best and isn't the most important. You could argue maybe it's the best, but it isn't the most important. That's probably Blighted Burgeoning, but it is the most powerful in my opinion. Like I think it is the most like one of the better whatever. You could make the argument it's the best green common. I guess is kind of the joke. Um, and I think I missed that this basically draws a card. Again, it does. If it just said draw a card, it would be insane. Obviously, as we all know. But in a lot of in some games it got there. The problem the so I missed on this card in that surveilling one on turn two is kind of bad because you pretty much want to draw whatever the top card on your deck is most of the time. You just want to like draw cards. It doesn't really matter what the cards are. You want lands, you want spells. It's too early in the game for that surveil one to really matter. In the late game, the surveil does matter. So like, so you kind of don't really want to trade this. So it does have this weirdness to it that prevents it from being like really absurd, which is kind of how I felt about it when I played with it in my pre-release. I was like, oh, this card's insane, but that's because I kind of was always just playing it on like turn 4, like by happenstance. I was playing it in another 2-drop on turn 4, and it was like, oh, that's just not what you want to be doing. And yeah, so I missed on this card just because I didn't realize how good the surveil was on it. Best in green, Tangled Skyline. I love Tangled Skyline. And this card, I think, certainly had the potential to sort of look bad just because it's 5 mana, do nothing. But the do nothing came along with it. Hey, next turn you're going to do something very, very good. And it's true. You were going to get to do something very, very good next turn. And this just, like the ability to spend 7 mana in this way, like over 2 turns, obviously, is not really 7 mana. It's like 5.5 mana. Like it's not even like 6 mana. It's like 5.5 mana. Which is really the joke. So, it's just really strong. Like it's just a really strong card that interacted well with the format, and I think I think even if this basically just had completely like no impact on Phyrexians at all, was just like this creature that you get has reach, it would probably still have been fine. I don't think it would have been as good, but I think it probably still would have been fine. Just the rate is really solid. Gaining life is good and limited. This format did not have a ton of ways to gain life. This is one of them. This was the best one, I think. And it really did help you prevent like the reach. The reach was just so important too. There was just so many decks that was like, the reach just kills them. So this was really nice. On to the multicolored stuff. My worst rating, Invasion of Amonkhet. Like many others, I didn't see the value of this card. I basically was just like, it's a discard spell. Discard spells aren't good in limited. Discard spells that draw cards are very good. And I think the difference between draw 1, your opponent discards 1, and your opponent discards 2 is like really significant. So I think that's something I missed as well. I just sort of thought of it as that's typical, but it's actually more like a Nezumi Informant type card where it's like a 1/1 that makes your opponent discard a card, because that's kind of like a draw 1 discard 1 in in sort of the same idea, right? Because the drawing one is the fact that you played the card onto the battlefield and it's on the battle, all that stuff. But yeah, I think it's just so much like the Mill 3. I think that was actually a design miss from them. I think they probably should have just ignored that. It probably like, this was probably a little bit too good. It ended up being a tier 1 card, obviously. Like it ended up being a top tier card in the set. It was really strong. You could like first pick it happily. Uh, I thought I probably like passed this on day one or something and was just like, this card's terrible. It's not good. It's actually just like fantastic. And I also missed that like flipping it just wins the game. Like you just win. I think I didn't pay enough attention to the back of this card being like a 4/4. Like that's kind of huge. Like I think that I was like whatever. A lot of these are like 4/4s. This one was especially large because it could be like a flyer too, and there were a lot of flyers. So that was a miss from me. This is my last thing I'm going to talk about today. My best multicolor rating, Marshal of Zhalfir. I had this as a tier 1 card. I think a lot of people underrated this card. And like people like saw this card like, oh, it's a good card. But I think I saw this card and was like, no, this is a transcendently good card. This is a card that is defining the best archetype in the format. And I was right. I saw this card and I was like, blue-white is the best deck in the format. And that was correct. And I think a lot of people were like, oh, blue-white's whatever. This is my biggest thing I was right about in this format is that blue-white was going to be the best deck. And this was a large reason for that. But yeah, I mean, just this card did so many things. The tap ability basically never came up that actually mattered. It did have a couple of times where it sort of mattered, but it was just nice to have. It being a lord was just so good. So I don't know, won me a number of games. So this card was really strong. And that's going to conclude my self-assessment here. So thank you for watching. Hopefully you learned something as well, but maybe how card evaluation process goes and how to be better at it. If you did, that's great. If not, that's also like fine. I don't know. I don't have to be like this doesn't have to be like super, educational or whatever. So, anyways, see you.